Welcome to Unlocked, the home of common sense that speaks Britain's language. Tick-tock, tick-tock, it's Brexit o'clock. Yes, there are now just 35 days left until we finally leave the European Union. There is now barely a month to finish off what has eluded us for 4.5 years, but still a satisfactory deal seems more evasive than a smile from Guy Verhofstadt.
This week, some crumbs of comfort were thrown our way. Yesterday, after 10 long months in Parliament, the Fisheries Act was passed, claiming that the UK will have full control of our fishing waters for the first time since 1973. Boris's true blue Tory till I die fan swallowed it hook, line and sinker, but was it a red herring? Did it afford the veneer of control while offering an escape chute for betrayal?
Yesterday, the long dormant ERG, who for these past months have been quieter than Trappist monks, hinted that they would vote against any Brino deal, saying that Boris would be toast. Herring, toast, it all sounds like a continental breakfast. But will Boris make a dog's dinner out of Brexit?
To analyse all of this, we have Brexit's very own pessimistic Meg, Ben Habib, followed by Patrick O'Flynn, spokesperson for the Social Democratic Party, journalist and former MEP. And with all eyes on fishing, we have the Fisherman's Queen, June Mummery. Next, we have Aussie economist Catherine McBride, who will discuss the opportunities that await a freshly liberated global Britain. And finally, we have Professor Frank Furedi, author of Democracy Under Siege, who's here to tell us that the Brexit spirit is alive and kicking in Hungary.
So our first guest is Ben Habib. Now, I'm not so sure about this pessimistic Meg thing, because actually I think Ben has been a harbinger of truth. He's had his finger right on the pulse right from the start, ruffled a few feathers, but that's his job. No, Ben has been true and pure and honest on Brexit from the beginning. But I've got to say this, Ben, this week you've been posting a lot of videos about can we trust Boris? They've annoyed a few people. That's why you did them. They've been beautiful. They've been unlocked all week. But as we approach the final countdown in Europe, can we trust Boris on Brexit?
Well, last week, I think at the end of the show, I gave Boris a 0 out of 10 for his Brexit endeavours, and I'm afraid I'm still at 0. I've probably stolen your thunder. You're probably going to ask that question again at the end of the show, Martin. But I'm still at 0, I'm afraid. I can't see how he unpicks the withdrawal agreement, how he unpicks EU state aid law applying in Northern Ireland and therefore the United Kingdom, how he gets rid of the Irish sea border, how he is going to ensure that we stay out of the level playing field, having promised to sign up to it in the political declaration, how he stays away from giving them fixed quotas on fishing, which, by the way, we've already offered them. They just weren't significant enough for Barnier to accept them. How he's going to sidestep his promise to give the ECJ a special position in the United Kingdom's legal system going forward, and how he's going to step away from the promise he made to cooperate in research and industrial development of our military so that we can act in an interoperable fashion with the EU. You know, he's made all these commitments. He's signed some of them up into an international legally binding treaty from which his own MPs are restricting him from escaping. The House of Lords is up in arms about it. So I think he's caught really between a rock and a hard place. We saw today that David Frost had tweeted saying that any deal he does will be sovereign compliant, but we've already done a deal that undermines our sovereignty. So David Frost isn't starting at a position of nil, if you like. He's starting at -10. He's got to wake his way back, and he's got to do it against the tide. So I'm still pessimistic, Ben. I'm optimistic that ultimately, maybe in the next 25 years sometime, the British people will get this right and we'll get our sovereignty back. But I don't think it's going to be in 2020.
So, okay, Ben, thank you for that. What about this Fisheries Act that's got the royal assent this week? Do you think that's a good thing for Brexiteers to be celebrating about? Or can you explain to our viewers what it is?
Well, for those of us who work in the corporate world, the Fisheries Act is nothing more than a board resolution for the company to go ahead enter into a deal to take back our fishing waters. It isn't actually the deal itself. It's merely an authorization for the government to go ahead and get control of our fishing waters. So rather like the Withdrawal Agreement Act, which gave us the right to enter into the withdrawal agreement, it doesn't actually bind the EU into anything that act may say. It just authorizes our government to do what the act says. So yes, it's a welcome step forward. Our government seemingly is going to at least try to take control of our fishing waters. It's got authority to now do that. So it's a step in the right direction, but it's not the deal itself.
I suppose at least our government will be responsible if they do sell us out again. Now, having got control under an act, it will be, you know, on their watch if they sell us out. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, you know, Boris has got an 80-seat majority. All of the MPs that were returned to Parliament by the Conservative Party did it on a promise to get Brexit done. So they are all culpable, including the Spartan ERG, who are looking out for British interests, including the Spartan ERG, who singularly failed to call out any of the deficiencies in the withdrawal agreement first time round. I'm sure they'll be standing up.
Well, we've just had Sue-Marie Davis from on Facebook message while you've been chatting, Ben. She's enjoying very much what you're saying. She says, but if the government was serious about no deal, serious about even getting a good deal, they'd have walked away by now. Yeah. So what are they doing? Still talking?
Absolutely, they would have walked away. The negotiating mandate in February stipulated that if we don't have a deal that's pretty much done by 30th June, we'll walk away. At that point, Boris, in his normal bombastic manner, said he's going to put a tiger in the tank of negotiations to get a deal by July. That was not music to my ears. But anyway, we didn't walk by the end of July. Then he moved that to the 15th of October, and he said we would move, we'd head towards no deal unless the EU relented in its demands on state aid and fisheries. And, you know, lo and behold, they haven't relented in their demand. And we've got now, again, one of the other tweets put out by Frost today was that I'm going to go on negotiating until the last possible moment. But that actually isn't David Frost's mandate. His mandate was to walk at the end of June if he didn't get a deal. So David Frost isn't adhering to the UK mandate to which he was signed up to. And so when you set a deadline and you say you're going to take certain actions at the end of that deadline unless your terms are fulfilled, and then you fail to take those actions, your bluff is called. And we now know Boris Johnson has not got the guts to do a no deal. We also therefore know he was bluffing us last year when he said he'd rather be dead in a ditch than not leave on 31st October. That was bluster, ladies and gentlemen. That was not the truth.
Well, Ben, I'll tell you this much, McBride. There are Facebook comments piling in, and here's one from Al. Boris couldn't run a bath, is what he says, which I think is direct and to the point, perhaps even more so than yourself. Ben, I want to probe you, if I could, on these comments from the ERG this week. Is it serious that they're going to turn against Boris? Is there going to be some sort of coup? Or is it just yet more empty talk?
Well, the ERG were conspicuously absent from any critical analysis of the withdrawal agreement last year. And now we have the ignominious position of the government having to seek to breach international law to reverse some of the pernicious provisions of that agreement. So my faith in the ERG isn't nil, because they did at least stand up to Mrs. May, but it's pretty close to nil. They put party before country last year, and what they're going to have to do now is absolutely put country before party. And have they got the guts and courage to do it? Only time will tell. The only people in Parliament, and they will be called on to do it because I'm sure we're going to sign up to a bad deal. The only people in Parliament who can actually make sure Boris doesn't sell us down the drain is the ERG. So if Steve Baker's watching, if Mark Francois is watching, if any of the other members, I have utter faith, by the way, in John Redwood, but if any of the others are watching, they better be ready to stand up in the Commons and do what they always said they would do, which is protect the United Kingdom's sovereignty as we leave the European Union.
Yeah, and I can see Patrick O'Flynn nodding feverishly in the background there. We're coming to you soon, Captain. But Ben, I'm not going to ask you for your scores on the doors on Brexit this week, because I think it's a futile example. Because I know that you'll give Boris 0. There'll be more zeros tonight than on Guy Verhofstadt's expenses claims. So we won't go down that route. But what I would ask all of you to think about is a statement, a comment, a message for Boris Johnson as we approach the end game. Belinda, probe Ben.
Well, Ben, I wanted to ask you, I know you're a purist, Ben, and I get that, and we need purists on this debate. You know, it's the only way we get the government to kind of stick to their manifesto, with having you pestering them on the sidelines. It's fantastic. But are there any compromises you could stomach if they are coming next week? Are there any lines you don't mind blurring a little bit, because it's the only chance we've got of doing this properly?
Well, Belinda, they keep telling us that this is a negotiation about a trade deal. It isn't. We're not negotiating a trade deal. What we're negotiating is our sovereignty. We're negotiating, it's absurd, but we're having to negotiate the right to do what every other sovereign state in this world does, with the exception of members of the European Union. And I find the suggestion of compromise in that regard abominable. I want 100% of our red lines. I want the ECJ to have no part in UK courts or in the way that we apply law in this country. I want to have no part of military interoperability with the European Defence Union. I want no part of fixed quotas in our waters. Our waters are for our fishermen. I want no part of their EU state aid laws, competition laws, environmental laws, competition laws, I said that twice, and tax laws. I want full right for our government, however bloody awful they are, to cock things up on their own without the EU doing it for us.
Well, actually, Ben, I think what you're asking is perfectly reasonable, and what every independent nation state should ask. I don't know why it's seen as such an extremist, outrageous point of view. You're just being perfectly moderate and centrist in what you're after with the trade deal. Yes,
and again, full torpedoes from HMS Habib, as we'd expect on this show. Now, a quick reminder: if you're watching the show, if you're enjoying it, please get involved, comment on Facebook, and please follow us on Facebook at Unlocked United Kingdom, and also on YouTube and on Twitter at Unlocked_UK_. Ben, coming back to you in a bit for your statement to Boris Johnson, but moving swiftly onwards to our next guest. And I'm delighted to have Patrick O'Flynn on the show. I've been a huge admirer of you, Patrick, your journalism, your political activity for many years. So thank you so much for coming on tonight. So you've heard what Ben Habib has said there. They call him pessimistic Ben. I prefer to
Meg.
Pessimistic Meg. I prefer to believe that actually, Ben has actually had his finger on the pulse all the way along. Meanwhile, back in the pragmatic world, Patrick, for you as a long-time MEP, journalist, campaigner, and a solid Brexiteer, a stick of rock, break you in half, it says Brexit. What is your idea of a compromise on Brexit, if any, Patrick?
Well, I must say, I don't think I've ever been on a panel before where I've already been kind of outranked in my criticism of conservative so-called Eurosceptics, but I'm not quite going to be able to live up to Ben. I think the first question you asked was, should we trust Boris Johnson? And that makes me remember a phrase that my old UKIP MEP pal Tim Aker used to say, "I've never trust a Tory," which I think is quite harsh, because I don't know, there are many people who've been in the Conservatives and then come out or gone back in, and I try not to be too tribal on party lines, but nonetheless, I think it's much more a question of looking at what's in the self-interest of Boris Johnson rather than saying, can we trust him? And there are certain factors that make it very costly for him to completely sell us out. I think it's very positive that Nigel Farage is waiting in the wings, coughing from off stage and can be heard, and Reform UK potentially can come back in, just as a lot of Conservative voters are really irritated with Boris Johnson on a wide variety of fronts. Oddly, I think Dominic Cummings going has kind of put Brexiteers on the hair trigger as well, and that will be bearing down on him. Equally, it looks like in the first or second quarter of next year, our economy is going to be bouncing back really strongly. If we've had a vaccine that's been widely administered, we could be looking at 15% growth from the end of the first quarter into the second quarter. And that means that even if we have a short-term economic and trading impediment from moving to WTO terms, it will be kind of lost in the backwash. It might be, we're only growing at 14% this quarter instead of 15%, and the Remainers might try and make that have traction. I don't see that working. It's kind of, there's a lot less to fear for Boris Johnson of ending up no deal than there is of selling out. The kind of one negative, I suppose, on the horizon is that the arrival of the Biden presidency is going to put him under some degree of pressure as regards to Northern Ireland. Although, as I noted this week, in fact, it's not the United Kingdom that's proposing to put any border apparatus up in Northern Ireland whatsoever. It's the EU if they haven't got a deal to protect their blessed single market. So even there, I think the costs of badly diluting Brexit for Boris Johnson are very high. Nigel's waiting in the wings. The government hasn't been going well on other fronts this year, and that's all quite promising. And I do think we'll end up with some degree of fudge.
Okay. Well then, Patrick, if there is a fudge, if there's a deal that sort of leaves us half in, half out, and there was literally no point in Boris being elected and taking over May, how do you think Brexiteers will react to that? Do you think they're tired and they're just done with it, or do you think they will resurrect, reunite, regroup, and cream off that essential 10% that the Tories are always after in the polls? And secondly, what are you going to do about it if it's a fudge deal?
Well, as they say, the devil will be in the detail. I think, for instance, on some of the level playing fields, we'll have what you might call notional sovereignty, in that we will be in charge of our own policy. But should we take certain steps about, subsidising an industrial sector that the EU's unhappy with, they might have a sort of consequential where they relegate our frictionless trade. So there might be that's the sort of fudge to look at. Then also on fishing, I think where we end is more important than where we start. So, personally, and maybe June will want to jump in at some point, I can accept a gradual, an instant restoration of our sovereignty over our waters, but a gradual expansion of the capacity of the British fleet and a gradual wind down of European access, perhaps in return for continued British fleet access to European waters and European markets. I think where we end up in 5 years' time, to me, is the direction of travel is the really crucial thing there. So I saw today the report of someone on the EU side, Barnier, I think, saying, "Oh, Britain, you can have 15 to 18% of our quota in your waters," which is obviously completely laughable. So I think most Brexiteers on
sorry, go on. Here because June Mummery is shaking her head so hard.
I'll let June in. I've been told off by June many times.
And let me tell you this is a woman you don't go on the wrong side of. She might whack you around there with a cod. June, you heard what Patrick just said about a tapered down deal. I think I know what's coming, but speak to Patrick, please.
Patrick, come on. No, that can't happen, Patrick. We've waited 40 years to take back full control of our waters. How on earth can the UK be an independent coastal state when we're handing some of it back? I mean, look at Iceland. Iceland realised that we were fishing their waters and making loads of money out of that. They asked us to leave. But when we turned around and said, well, no, I don't think we will, they bombed us because they had guts. They knew that the time had come where they protected their country and their citizens. And today, for example, I find myself trying to explain what fishing is all about. It's about coastal communities that are in need of jobs. We will take back full control. And I hope that Mr. Barnier has really put himself in a funny situation, because he said he'll walk tomorrow. So this will all be over tomorrow in my eyes. That's it. He'll be gone because there's no way that they can take back our fisheries. Boris knows he'll be finished. The great British public are behind us on this one. I mean, the amount of emails I have and letters and phone calls is phenomenal. You know, why can't we all see, and you will never, ever rebuild places like Lowestoft, Great Yarmouth, Fleetwood, Hartlepool, Whitby, unless we have it all.
But June, we've got many Brexiteers who would say, actually, in support of what Patrick's saying, we actually need time to rebuild the fleet. We need time to let our waters, you know, recover from all the plundering of the super trawlers, and those extra 3 to 5 years will help.
Ben Habib is raising a hand. We have to cut to Ben Habib, because if we don't, we won't get punched. Ben Habib.
Well, I just want to support June, because we've had 4 years to prepare to take back control of our waters. We've had 4 years to put in grants, loan schemes, apprenticeships, build more boats, get our fleet absolutely ready to take back control. So what the devil has the government been up to for 4 years?
Patrick?
And to give them an...
Yeah, well, I'll come in. I mean, Boris Johnson hasn't been, to be fair, hasn't been Prime Minister for 4 years. For much of that time, it was the absolutely lamentable Theresa May. And I would say that since he's come in, he's really been in a bit of a firefight. So I agree with what June and Ben say in the grand scheme of things, but I do say that a phased deal where perhaps we're selling short-term licenses to raise revenue to invest in coastal communities, with the aim of within 3 to 5 years of having a fleet capable of fishing, you know, with equilibrium across our waters and full control. I don't really see that there's anything to be frightened of in that.
Okay, well, that there are more hands going up in here than in a school classroom. But I'll tell you what, before we go back to Ben Habib and June shaking her head so hard it's going to drop off. Frank Furedi, you've been raising your hand. In fact, you've been almost punching the computer screen. Over to you.
Well, you know, I know next to nothing about fishing, but the one thing I do know is that the whole issue of fishing isn't just simply about the coastal communities. Fishing and the coastal communities are symbolic of sovereignty. I mean, there's no issue that is more symbolic of what an independent nation is all about than defending and protecting your waters. So for that reason, this is the one area where I don't think compromise is allowed or is possible, for the very simple reason that once we do that, then sovereignty itself becomes negotiable, and we just simply give away bits of our sovereignty here and there. So I would really stick very firmly on this issue, just simply because it transcends the needs and the interests of a particular community within our country.
Frank, I absolutely think you've nailed it there. You've come into this, and there are so many debates, aren't there, Belinda, about, well, it's only 0.1% of the economy. Why are you so bothered and all this? But it's not about that. It is about the essence, the boiled down purity of sovereignty and taking back control. You can try and explain this all year long to Ramonas, and they won't ever get it. But it's going to kick it off. Anyway, June, we're coming back to you for a proper talk soon. But back to Patrick, if we could. Patrick, I want to talk to you about this absurd situation this week about Joe Biden talking about a controlled, hard, monitored border in Northern Ireland, between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Nobody has said that, ever. No Brexiteers, not even the most ludicrous of the Remainers, not even the European Union. Why is he saying it, and where is this nonsense coming from, Frank?
Well, I think, yeah, I think you know, I assume he's been briefed by people around him who are of a sort of Irish Republican bent to a certain extent, as we think is he. I mean, this is very much an issue where the United Kingdom calls the bluff of everybody. I mean, so we're not going to put in border controls, a hard border. So who is then? And if you follow it along, the implication is surely that actually the Republic of Ireland, whose population, you know, shed a lot of blood for independence, a lot of it being the blood of British people too, that they're going to, at the behest of a foreign power, the European Union, they're going to put up a physical border with Northern Ireland, who many Republic citizens would love to see reunification with. I mean, that's absolutely absurd. So I think the government has to hold the line on this, absolutely, and stand up to Joe Biden. I think Biden's arrival on the scene is very late. Clearly, there are people around Boris Johnson, perhaps in the Foreign Office, who want to kowtow to him. But the fact is, if the actual words he used were supporting British policy, because we're saying we don't want any more border apparatus at all. If any checks needed doing, they could be done electronically, remotely. So that is kind of a red herring issue. So I do think that would be a very serious compromise if we folded because Uncle Sam kind of lent on us. I think that really would ignite the Brexit tribe against Boris Johnson.
Yeah, I also think in my very humbly, I say this, that Biden's team needs to read the WA and read the political declaration, because it's almost like they're talking about fairy tales and masters and servants and still the whole unify Ireland thing. Are you worried or concerned at all, Patrick, that Biden will work closely with the EU even after the 31st of December to keep putting pressure on Boris for soft dealings with Ireland, for a referendum for Ireland to reunite? How concerned are you about that?
I don't think a referendum on reunification is a realistic prospect at all. I do think we've got someone who inclines to the kind of old American simplistic view of the troubles in Ireland, and that's unfortunate. Whatever one thought of Donald Trump, and I wasn't a fan, he was an instinctive fan of the United Kingdom. So I think, by the way, Biden and his people also need to read the Belfast Agreement, because they claim all sorts of obligations are in it, which actually aren't in it. And, there is a border in Ireland because there are two countries, and one of them, Northern Ireland, is part of the United Kingdom. And yes, we don't want to aggravate and bring back any feeling of troubles. Absolutely not. But one of the hugest thing that Boris could do would be to capitulate to an American president who's just arrived on the scene and doesn't know what he's talking about. That would be a catastrophe. I don't see it.
Okay, so we're about to move on to June Mummery. June, have a quick swig of gin. We're just about to read out a comment from Facebook, because it's really going berserk on Facebook. And here's Chris Sharp. We need to make it clear to Boris that if he and his government, his party will be finished if they capitulate on the European Union. Finished. See, that's the mood of the country. And I do think we need to remember that. It's not just about kind of fudging this, blustering their way through. COVID is a cover. The economic impact of COVID, I think, is a great kind of opt-out clause for Boris to hide behind that. As Patrick, you said, is Joe Biden, this kind of softening of the edges, but we've got to keep focused on Brexit. And June Mummery, we've got to come to you now, because today, what a tap dance again. It's still going on about fishing. Michel Barnier said today about 15 to 18% will be returned. Now, I don't know about you, but Remainers have spent the last 4 years not understanding that 52 is a bigger number than 48. And now they don't seem to understand that 18 is a smaller number than 100% control. June, how is the fishing community reacting to this nonsense about us taking back control via 18% of fishing quotas?
Well, firstly, Mr. Barnier might be able to wrap our government round his little finger. But I can tell you now, he cannot wrap the great British public around his little finger. Further questions I've been asked today. Let's just get something straight. Fishing is the most sustainable, renewable resource the UK has. You take a bit, you leave a bit, and when you come back, there's a little bit more. What other country would give that away? Number two, coastal communities. So don't they matter anymore? So do we just write coastal men and women off, do we? Do we just say, well, now don't worry about them? Oh, hang on a minute. What about all the great vacays that happened this year? Where did everybody flock to? To the coastal towns and villages. How are we supposed to maintain these coastal towns and villages with no money? How do we keep the flower beds pretty? How do we look after our roads and buildings? Keep our beaches nice and sandy and clean, getting the blue flag for our beaches. How are we supposed to fund that? No, you can't have any GDP. No, because you're the sorry people. We're the kings and queens. That's going to stop. Patrick, we've got boats that will catch that fish. We are ready on January the 1st to get out to sea, protect our ocean, kick out the flagships, kick out the pulse trawlers and kick out the super trawlers and look after our ocean and protect Mother Nature. That's another very important thing that we're overlooking here. We're fooling around with her. That's going to stop. And then what will happen is we'll have grants put in place because what did our Prime Minister say? Build, build, build. So we won't be building sandcastles. We'll be building fleets of boats that will employ UK fishermen and women to go out and catch fish, land UK fresh fish into our supermarkets rather than all this farmed crap that we have there at the moment. And let's be great again. For goodness sake, I'm shocked at the tweets I've had today. Oh, well, it's not worth this. Grow up, everyone. Get some true grit behind you and get on with some work. We've got a fantastic country. And more than ever, Patrick, more than ever, we need this resource because what do we all forget what it is? It's a food resource. We can rely on that. So, you know, I'm sorry to rant every time I'm on here. One day I want to come on and be all like with a hula, hula, hula and being happy about it all. But every day a constant battle. And I'm not battling with the EU anymore. I'm battling with my own countrymen and women. I mean, what the hell is that all about? You know,
June, I've got to say, June, this is not a rant. And can we just give a round of applause to June Mummery?
Yeah, I'll say that.
I mean, everybody. How amazing was
Definitely.
that? How amazing has June Mummery been since the very, very beginning? The most formidable of MEPs. Sorry, Patrick and Ben, and you. I mean, formidable, you know, fighting all the way to the wire. And it's absolutely clear we must remember this isn't over yet. And June, this conversation about build back better, you know, the Biden thing, build back better the coastal ports. Build back better the fleet.
The problem is it hasn't been happening. So the government says they're going to build back, but they should have started it. Even, I mean, Boris has been in for a year. Also, there are all sorts of questions about how to police the 3 to 5 year transition. You know what the EU super trawlers and the boats are going to be like. Do you think they're really going to listen to Boris saying, don't go into our waters as much as you did? How are we going to police it? But Patrick, would you like to quickly respond to June?
Yeah, there was just one thing I wanted to respond to her about the coastal communities. Actually, the coastal towns are almost like the first wave of the blue wall because a lot of them are marginal constituencies. And within fairly recent memory, if you know, Great Yarmouth, Lowestoft, the Thanet seat that Nigel stood in, Labour was in with a shout, either did hold or was in with a shout of gaining those seats. So I think those coastal communities can use a lot of power there because if Boris gets it wrong, all those seats are in play at the next election. And you know, whatever we think of the Conservatives, again, I have to say that self-interest is by no means, you know, last on their list of things they will consider.
Good point,
Okay,
Patrick.
so we've got some great Facebook comments coming on. The first one, I've just had to say, June, and I agree with this. You know, we talk a lot about Ben for 10, Ben Habib number 10, but from here, Paul, June should be the Prime Minister. June, a lot of people say this, and I know that, you know, we've had this chat many times in Brussels and Strasbourg, perhaps over a few gins and drinks, but you are an amazing person and you should get back involved with politics. I really believe that. Really believe that. Secondly, Darren Walker. I live in an area that voted Tory for the first time in 50 years. Most are tired of Boris being down. He's got an 80-seat majority. Wake up and serve Britain. So there's a lot of people out there that are just watching and waiting and want this to all happen. June, We're going to come back to you soon for your comments to Boris Johnson. I think we need to affix bayonets for this one, but let's now move Belinda onto our next guest today on Unlocked.
Yes, we are very lucky. We have got the fantastic Catherine McBride on the show today. Thank you for joining us. Catherine has written extensively on Brexit. She helped campaign with Vote Leave, and she's an economist from Australia who spent many years in the UK. So thank you so much, Catherine, for coming on tonight. I'd like to start with the first question. You're an Australian lady who spent some years in the UK. You've studied economics. Why is Brexit so important to you?
Hi everyone, and thanks for that introduction. I suppose it's important because I have lived a lot of my life outside of the UK, and I've traded all around the world, sitting in London, trading international derivatives and commodity derivatives. And you know that this obsession people have with the world is Europe, and if you're not in Europe, it doesn't matter. It is extraordinary. They often used to joke that Brexiteers were little Englanders, but in fact, the little people in this are the Remain. And before we sort of move on to this, I'd really like to pick up on some of the things that June said, because it is absurd, this fishing article, the whole suggestion that you would give away a natural resource. And I have written about that several times. Boris came in on this levelling up agenda. Well, one of the areas that really needs levelling up, I know that a lot of people like to look at the great industrial areas and want to have those revived again, which is a good idea. I have nothing against that. But the coastal communities could be revived as well. As June so effectively said, this is an incredibly ecologically sound industry, and it's something where the UK has a comparative advantage. The whole idea of trade is that you sell what you can produce effectively and you import what someone else can produce effectively. The EU has never understood that. They use trade really as a way to politically bind the EU. So if you look at some of the fishing quotas, someone tweeted me on Twitter the other day saying, oh, well, we buy cod from Portugal and we sell mackerel to Portugal because they don't like, cod and we don't like mackerel. Now, both of those are to do with the EU's division of quotas, which is kind of bizarre. UK fishermen should be fishing for the fish that UK people like to eat. And if they can buy stuff that they can sell elsewhere, that's great. If they can find stuff that they can sell elsewhere. But this forced quota system where you have people catching stuff they don't want and have to trade it with other EU countries is a major problem.
Yeah, good point.
But I think that the whole idea that June did mention, that the great joy of fish is you can leave them in the sea, and when you get them next year or next month or whatever, they'll be bigger. They don't go off. It's not a resource. Like if you don't harvest this year's wheat, you lose that harvest. Okay, it will be wrecked by the snow and the cold and the ice, and you cannot harvest it next year. The same with lamb. We produce a lot of lamb here, but if you leave it a year, it's no longer lamb, it's mutton. Fish aren't like that. They in fact get bigger. It is like the most fantastic commodity, yet we're throwing it away. It's stupid.
Catherine, June Mummery is nodding in approval in the background there, because that's what it's about. And it's not just about fishing, is it? It's about sustainability. And a great point that June raised continually in the European Union, in Brussels and Strasbourg, was about sustainability, about protecting our resources and not decimating them by things like pulse fishing, which, by the way, and super trawlers, which, by the way, the European Union seem okay with. Where are the green activists? Where are the dolphin huggers around things like that? The answer is they're absent because they'd rather stick to their political ideology than the actual resource that we should protect. Next question, Catherine. We hear a lot, don't we, about an Australian-style deal that the UK wants from the EU. What is that?
That's a really good question. I wish you hadn't asked me. What is the Australia doesn't have an overarching deal. So we don't have one of these long sort of TTIP type of arrangements that took years to get to, or the CETA arrangement that they have with Canada. But they do have certain deals that allow Australian planes to land in Europe and things like that. Despite what you might hear, Australia is able to sell beef, for instance, to the EU, but they have a very small quota. So that they do sell into the EU, but they're restricted by quotas and they're restricted by massive tariffs. But in a way, it's been very good for Australia to be restricted this way, because when I was a child growing up in Australia, almost everything we produced was sold to Britain. And when the British dumped Australia pretty much overnight, well, not quite, but it forced Australia to look for other markets, and they found other markets. I mean, this is the thing that so many people fighting to remain in the EU have forgotten about, is that the world is growing so quickly at the moment, and it's growing not in the EU, and we should be trading with other people. And already before COVID, obviously, but the UK started to sell crabs to China. And salmon is a very big export of ours, and we can sell that all over the place. We sell it smoked salmon, so it transports well. But I was recently in Turkey over the summer, and there's salmon available in every restaurant, every upmarket restaurant in Istanbul, but it all comes from Norway. And you think, well, why isn't it coming from the UK? Well,
yeah, absolutely. I find the whole trade debate it has become so toxic as well, because all of a sudden, we've had a lot in the news about foreign aid this week and about the Tories cutting it, and lots of the FBPE types on Twitter are claiming how nasty and horrific the Tories are. But the EU's trade deals with these developing countries, they claim it's to help them. Can you tell our viewers how actually the EU trade deals aren't really helping developing countries, and how Brexit can afford the UK the ability to strike fairer trade deals with developing countries?
That's a wonderful question, and I always carry these figures with me at any time from the EU, because the EU is very, very mercantilist. That means they like to sell you things, but they don't see trade as where they buy something from you. And the British, well, actually it was a Scot, but we worked out trade pretty early, and we understood that you were much better off to import things that someone else can make more effectively than you can. So the real benefit of trade is to import, and we really only export to pay for our imports, if you like. Where the European Union, a lot of the countries are the exact opposite. They only want to sell you stuff and get money, and they're very reluctant to buy anything back. And the EU for a long time was selling subsidized food into some of the poorest countries in the world, so that they were subsidizing their own farmers under the Common Agricultural Policy, and then happily selling that subsidized food and wiping out farmers in Africa. And they only changed this in 2015. So you'll often get attacked by people, and I think it was December 2015 too. So you get attacked by people on Twitter saying, oh, they have this anything but arms stuff. But when you actually look at the trade figures, and these are from last year, 2019, you will see that the 48 countries that are part of the anything but arms, they buy almost nothing from most of them. And there's one or two that have the most massive trade deficits with the EU, including places like Senegal, which is one of the poorest countries on earth.
Yeah, you make the point very well. And it's the fact that the EU has these trade deals, but they don't really buy anything from these developing countries that make it worthwhile.
And also, I'd like to kind of point out something that really, really stuck in my craw during the COVID crisis, and it was this. Do you remember that the European Union did not send a single euro to Italy, to Germany, and they were absolutely, totally absent from the battlefield and they sent 100 million euros in emergency funding to Morocco. To Morocco that isn't even in the European Union, because guess what? They want to expand their sphere of influence. How many times did we vote against this nonsense in Parliament? They're trying to get involved in global politics. They have no position to do that. I want to move on first to the next guest, but before that, Facebook's going mad. Listen to this comment. Darren Chaplin, don't ruin Grimsby. Labour since 1945, 2019, we went blue. We have Boris, we gave Boris our support. We want Brexit and nothing else. Nothing else. And that's a coastal community, June Mummery. I can see you nodding your head feverishly. Now we need to move on. I know, Catherine,
Can I just add one thing, though? We must be very careful with this negotiation that the Europeans who have made such a silly fuss about the fish to a point of saying today, what did Barnier say? Oh, we'll give you 12% of your own fish and we'll keep the rest. That I'm worried that they're going to use this as a way of then saying, oh, we'll give up on the fish if you give up on the level playing field. Yeah. And I think that this whole thing is just a way of sucker punching us in the negotiations. And that's something we must be so careful of, because that the level playing fields clauses prevent us from doing trade deals with the rest of the world, and
of course that's what the EU is really after, Catherine. You know, they're obsessed with the UK adhering and aligning with their crazy red tape, and this whole fish theatre could be a ploy just to force us into compromising over the level playing field. That's a really good point. Thank you so much, Catherine. We'll come back to you. But for now, we will move on to Frank Furedi. I'm so pleased to have you on, acclaimed author, writer of the incredible book, Democracy Under Siege. Thank you for coming onto the show, Frank. We've got a first question for you. We know the EU obviously has a complex relationship with Poland and Hungary. The Express on Monday reported that the EU has launched the Article 7 procedure against them, which can ultimately lead to the stripping of voting rights from both these countries. Can you tell us a bit about why the EU is at loggerheads with Hungary and Poland?
Well, I think ultimately the issue is about sovereignty, in that both Hungary and Poland, having lived under Soviet domination for over 40 years, take their national independence very seriously. And whatever you think of the government, they are really not prepared to compromise on this issue. And in recent times, there's been a series of clashes over what kind of values Hungary and Poland needs to live by. And what the Hungarian government and the Polish government really resent is being lectured by what they seem like a neo-colonial power that tells them, this is how you lead your family life. This is what a marriage should look like. So this year, the Hungarian government decided that it actually wants to affirm a value that's been around for thousands of years, but is now seen as being somehow weird, which is that in the real world, there's a man and there's a woman, and that there are ultimately only two sexes. In other words, it believes in a binary biological categories, and it said that therefore, they're not going to create a situation like we have in other parts of Europe, where you have a variety of LGBTIQ sort of identities which are formally recognized. And for Hungarians, that is normal, that's the norm. But for the EU, that's called heteronormativity, which in their eyes is a cultural crime, because we're not supposed to be just men and women. That's transphobic, and transphobic is like the moral equivalent of being xenophobic in relation to borders. And I think that's really where the struggle kicks in. And something very important happened yesterday that reminds me of the early days of Brexit, which is that yesterday, the Polish and the Hungarian prime ministers made a joint declaration basically saying that they're going to watch each other's back. They're going to support each other in these negotiations. And what Prime Minister Orban of Hungary said, I think is really, really important. It reminds me of something that Nigel Farage said a while back, when he said that in his eyes, money, because they're trying to take money away from Hungary, money is not as important as fundamental values. And I think that's a very brave, important step that they're taking. And I hope they manage to stand up to the pressure. And there's a lot of pressure on them to give way, including from Biden, who's trying to create an image of Hungary as being the semi-fascist Nazi state for standing up for its borders.
Well, Frank, I mean, there's loads to unpick there. And for people watching for the first time, haven't seen Frank on a lot, you came on to our US election special, and God damn you, you predicted Biden would win. You did. You called it right, so that's in your favor.
But my proudest moment. Yeah.
But also your book, Democracy Under Siege, you mentioned this really, really, I think, fascinating point that I want to share again and again, and that is of having too much democracy. There's a feeling that the elected don't want people to have a say, because when they have a say, they say the wrong thing. Is that Brexit spirit spreading now through Hungary and Poland?
I think very much so, because I go to Hungary quite a lot because I was born there. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, people were skeptical about Brexit, and they were often surprised when I said I'm a pro-Brexit sociology professor. Whereas now when I go to Hungary, people can often say to me, I can really understand what you were talking about, because at the end of the day, sort of we too understand the importance of standing up for our national independence. And in particular, I think what they're saying, which is very funny, is that they only have one regret about Brexit. And their regret is that if Britain leaves, and Britain has left, then the one nation that they could possibly rely on to take seriously some of the values that they believe in will be gone. And therefore, that's going to have very significant impact. I think for me, what's really exciting, and I feel a little bit like in the beginning of the Brexit referendum debates, what's exciting for me is that the pro-sovereignty arguments that are being promoted in East Europe resonate with what a lot of people think all over Europe, but that politicians, don't express those things. So you go to Italy, you go to Lombardy, and whenever I go there, people are talking about Italy leaving. You go to France, you're getting a lot of people beginning to think along similar lines. And I think, to me, that's a positive development.
Well, Frank, we've got a great quote in. Someone's just written on a Facebook page, listening to you, Frank. It's Daniel. He said, "My partner is Polish." Frank's points. This is the first time we're hearing this outside of Poland. It is spot on. And this is something we face quite a bit, across Europe, across the EU. People who have conservative views, people who have Eurosceptic views don't get represented in the media. They get called fascist. We've heard it before. Yeah. And it's such a breath of fresh air to have a platform to be able to speak about these issues. Now, I wanted to ask you a question. The EU is always, promoting itself as the peacemaker, but there is such an imbalance of power at the heart of the EU, especially with the larger, more powerful countries against Eastern European countries, the smaller ones, and also the more conservative ones. Where do you see the future of the Eastern European countries, or Poland and Hungary in particular, in the EU? Are they even welcome anymore?
Well, I think that increasingly, if you listen to the Portuguese Prime Minister this week, who was suggesting there should be a two-tier European Union, it seems to me that what's beginning to crystallize is an attempt to marginalize the East European countries so that they have a less significant role. They're basically like a quasi colonies, that have to fall in line with the dictates of what the oligarchy in Brussels says. So they would like to create a situation where there is a differentiated form of decision making. I think they don't like the fact that Poland and Hungary, any country, still got a veto over a number of decisions. And what they're now beginning to work towards is to see how they can eliminate the use of veto over decision making. The trouble is, at the moment, East European countries don't feel confident enough to leave the EU. But I think that if Italy, for example, left the EU, then that would be a signal for all of them to follow suit, because they all feel that at the moment they're being dominated, particularly by Germany. Angela Merkel in East Europe is regarded as like the kind of the quasi-tyrant that makes their life difficult. And I think that there's a kind of impulse to follow a kind of a Brexit kind of road, especially if Britain remains a positive role model for other countries. If Britain can demonstrate that being independent makes all the difference, it could have a massive influence, a transformative influence on politics on the continent.
Yeah, it's this domination, actually, the imbalance of power that I see as no recipe for peace whatsoever. So thank you for that, Frank.
I've got to say, Frank, it's the second time you've done the show now. An inspirational thinker, a brain like a chess player. You really kind of get down to the heart of this, and I think it's so inspirational to understand what's going on across the continent. Because how many times have we had Italians on this show, French on this show, Polish on the show, Hungarians on the show, and they love the spirit of Brexit, and it's to be celebrated. It's democracy in action. And please go and buy Frank Furedi's book. It's a brilliant read. Thank you so much. Now look, there's your blatant plug, Frank. Merry Christmas. Right, what we're going to do now is we're going to wrap off this show. As Ben Habib said at the start of the show, there is no point doing a prediction on where we're going with Brexit, because I think we'll get more zeros than there are in the Labour cabinet. But what we are going to do is ask all of you in turn to give a short, pithy message to Boris Johnson. If we're about to sell out on Brexit, if in the final hour this is about to be a climb down and a surrender, what's your message to Boris Johnson? Ben Habib.
Well, my message is that he must honour the contract he has with the British people, and that an independent United Kingdom now is needed more than ever, so that we can make regulations and make laws that will allow us to recover from the economic crisis, the pandemic-induced economic crisis. It's now more than ever vital that we have that liberty.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And Patrick O'Flynn, if you had one-to-one with Boris right now, what would you say before he went into the final negotiating room?
Well, I would say he's in an unusual position. He hasn't been Prime Minister for long, but we already know he'll be remembered for two things. And one of them is COVID. And, it's been tough, but that's not going to look very good on the CV. He's not judged to have done terribly well. But the other one is Brexit. And if he can be seen as a hero of Brexit who delivers a really meaningful Brexit, that will be his place in history. But if he sells out Brexit after his problems with COVID, then, far from being a Winston Churchill figure, he'll be more like an Edward Heath. And that doesn't bear thinking about.
That is a great point and a neat way into June Mummery. But before that, Patrick, if there is a sellout, if there is a Brino, are you going to get back involved in frontline politics?
Well, I'm supporting our little party, the SDP, which is a sort of centre ground but socially conservative and patriotic party. But I'll certainly roll my sleeves up again. I've never been that tribal, but I get involved with the big push and punishing the Conservatives if they sell out Brexit. Absolutely.
Good man, good man. June Mummery, let's batten down the hatches. June Mummery, message to Boris Johnson, fire away.
Well, my message to Boris is this. For what is a man, what has he got? If not himself, then he has not. To say the things he truly feels, and not the words of one who kneels. The record shows I took the blows, but did it my way.
The second round of applause for the night, June Mummery.
Absolutely. No more kneeling for anyone. Quite right. Now we come on to the wonderful, fantastic June. I love that. Catherine McBride, if you had a few minutes with Boris, what would you say to him?
I wish I could have thought of that, but following June, I would say, feel the fear and do it anyway. Boris has to take a great leap into the unknown. Stop listening to the large multinationals who will always want more, regardless of what he gives them. So he's got to walk away from them. He's got to walk away from the EU. It's a big, safe world out there. He's just got to go for it. Just feel the fear and do it anyway. Boris, just walk. Don't negotiate. There is nothing more to say. Just send a text. He must have done this to so many women. I don't know why. I don't know why.
I love how you got that in there, Catherine.
Get your secretary to do it, Boris. Just walk. You know how to do it.
It really is that simple. Free trade deal or walk. Quite right, Catherine. Thank you for that. That will resonate very well amongst them.
I know, that probably won't go down well.
That was brilliant. Frank, over to you. A few minutes with Boris, what would you say?
Well, I would say you got to resist all the pressure from Barnier or Biden, and also from the Remain camp, which is really powerful at the moment. I think he's got to show his mettle that the future of the nation is more important than the unpleasant experience of being under that kind of pressure. And I think that essentially he's got a choice of, is he going to be remembered as at the first possible occasion, or will he try to be a Churchill? And I think that choice is really crucially important. And I would end up by saying to Boris, under no circumstances should you take the knee.
Quite right. I think that's well said. Absolutely. And he has an 80-seat majority. There is no excuse whatsoever of handing out and selling out our sovereignty. There isn't.
Inspiring stuff. And look, we've had Frank Sinatra. We've had all sorts tonight. June, by your standards, that was superb. I don't know what you're drinking, but let's have one of them. And the final comment we got on Facebook here, because Facebook has been lighting up over this episode of Unlocked tonight. Kath and Trevor Knowles, watching this together, they're saying this: if you don't get us out 100%, Boris, you're history. That is what people are saying about Brexit. Compromise is not an option. Ben Habib, they're all with you. But listen, what a great show it's been tonight. Thank you so much for watching. If you like what we're doing, please follow us on Facebook at Unlocked United Kingdom, on YouTube and Twitter at Unlocked_UK_.